awareness is like breathing for us. It
Mm.
is what we need to do to be able to regulate ourselves.
Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote in 1952, "If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root some unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand." Wilson suggested that if we could identify and continually surrender these unrealistic and unrealizable demands, that we may then be able to accomplish what he imagined to be the recovery's next frontier, something he called emotional sobriety. Flash forward 70 years and join psychotherapists and best-selling authors Tom Rutledge and Dr. Alan Berger, who have taken up the mantle of exploring Bill Wilson's new frontier. Welcome to Emotional Sobriety.
I'm Tom Rutledge. With me is, as always, the good Dr. Berger, Dr. Alan Berger, and our producer, and I think director as well, because he keeps us in line as we go along with this, is Patrick Newman. So,
Hey guys.
Hi, Patrick. Listen, Tom, you just came in from a walk.
it's hot as hell here, but it's if I don't, I do exercise inside, so I have a rowing machine that I use to kind of keep myself in shape. And but Lucas doesn't do the rowing machine. My dog, he's not into the rowing, and so if and I often say, I've seen him when we have little kids over. Not very often, but when we have younger kids over, he goes crazy. And I realize, Lucas is stuck with an old man. And it's like, so I try to get out there and we have a big, long walk out back of on our property. And so when I go out there and just take a stroll and wander through there, of course, he runs a zillion miles while I'm doing that through all the woods and stuff like that, chasing everything that he can chase and all that. So I try to get out there and do that. And I tell you what, it's the old man ego. It just makes me feel good that I can still go out there and make that walk.
So you have these grounds that you can just kind of amble around.
Hey, listen, it's been the perfect sanctuary for COVID. It's like,
how many acres do you have, Tom?
We're sitting on 70 acres.
Wow.
So when we came out here in Ashton City, just outside of Nashville, there wasn't a whole lot here, it's just been growing, and that was 1992. That it's been growing ever since. So we're very grateful to have the padding around us. It's like it's not as quiet as it used to be, because we can hear civilization everywhere, but it's like we still have space to do that. And I have my I call it the nest, the little place where when I have just telephone, some of my clients are just telephone clients. So Lucas and I just go out and sit we have a little place in the woods where I can sit for 2 or 3 hours doing sessions just sitting in the woods, and it's a beautiful thing to do. It's one of those times where I'm just grateful that I don't have to have a real job.
Well, I went to my first in-person meeting out here in Joshua Tree in more than a year. I took my cake back in LA a few weeks ago for my 3 years, but first in person in the community I'm currently living in. And it's funny because I'll tell people that I moved out here, and they're like, what's the community like? Have you been meeting people? And I'm like, you've been living under a rock for the last year? Like, how do you meet people? I don't even know how to meet people outside of a COVID framework, but within it's just kind of like a non-starter. But now that, I got my vax, and I'm just getting kind of squirrely. I do, the Zoom meetings have been a lifeline, but I really, I think we all benefit from being, close to people, and, and then the meeting after the meeting, of course. And, the first share was a guy was talking about how he had just done a detailed inventory on critical race theory. So that was a little bit weird. But it was his 37th birthday. So I talked to him after, and he was actually pretty personable. So
well, I want to tell you that's because you're in California. I'm in rural Tennessee. Nobody is going to be doing that in a meeting around here. It's like, I promise.
Well, it's funny because the most he talked about, he did this critical race theory inventory and then showed it to a sponsor, and the sponsor had like the most AA response ever to this thing. He's like, "You write so eloquently." Yeah, that's what he said, which I thought was like a funny, very generous in spirit way of dealing with some weird shit.
Well, it reminds me of what sometimes if I go off on something, talking to Dee about whatever it is, sometimes through the years, she'll just go like, that sounds like something you would want to put in a book. In other words, you don't have to tell me.
Right.
Go right. Instead of go west, young man, go right.
Yeah, go right.
Well, I just came back from, it was about a 10-minute drive from McClune's Farmers Market. And it's an actual farm that's probably sitting on 40 acres of land. And they have a market where they sell their produce.
Wow.
Other goods from the local farms in the area. And so I was in heaven. I mean,
That's
I
great.
have not seen cherries that looked like this in my lifetime. I mean, my wife just had some of the grapes and she goes, these are amazing. These are amazing. So the beef is from some of the cattle in the area. I mean, we don't eat a lot of beef, but we got some fillets for the kids and stuff for a treat for us too. And it's fun. I mean, just living out. I was telling Patrick, it's such a different experience. You've been doing it for some time now, Tom. 92, and I'm only sitting on 2.5 acres, and I feel overwhelmed. I don't know why you deal with 70 acres, but I imagine you don't cut the grass on 70
Well,
acres.
it's the good news is it's mostly woods, so it's like that's the cool thing. We don't have I always tell people we don't have a lawn, we have a clearing, and it's like that's so that the moment I call it a lawn, I'm going to get nervous.
I would too if when I think of 70 acres, but it's such a different way of life, and I'm really enjoying it a lot. The pace is so much slower. I'm finding the people incredibly friendly and very genuine. I mean, nobody's trying to outdo anybody else. And, our neighbor came by with some flowers the other day and a candle and welcomed us in the area and stuff like that. It never happened in LA to me. I mean, so it's a wonderful experience so far here. And I'm looking forward to the fillets and the cucumbers and the cherries. I mean,
You should pretend you're like a Roman emperor when you eat those cherries.
That's right. And the other thing, they had these. I'm a big green pepper fan. I love frying up green pepper and putting them on Italian sausage. I mean, I can just. I mean,
I'm hungry. You're making me hungry.
Oh, and these green peppers were like this big. I mean, so I'm excited. It was fun little shopping. I mean, 10 minutes from the house. I mean, it's like, my goodness, it's a place I'm going to visit often. So that was cool. That was my first discovery. I hadn't been there before.
How are the kids doing?
Kids are doing great. They're in this summer camp called Camp America.
Mm-hmm.
They are just loving it. They're having so much fun. Maddie's done her first fishing, had her first fishing experience.
Wow.
She's fished for the first time, and it's catch release. So she was in a little boat on the lake, and they caught some and threw them back. And first day she didn't catch any. Second day she caught 4, and she was just besides herself. And it was so much fun. And Cece's having a gas. I mean, they coming back. They're just exhausted, but it's that good outdoor play all day long.
That's great.
It is great. No, it's really, there's been so many good things, and Jess is really, they're really ramping up with what she's doing, and she's working her little tail off. And so we're settling in. Still got a lot of boxes to unpack. So anytime you guys have extra 15 minutes, you want to come by and put some, and you know what? It's mostly books.
Yeah.
We moved 30,000 pounds of furniture. I'll bet 10,000 pounds of that furniture are books. I mean, seriously, we're probably.
Well, we have a problem with that. We love to have books, and I don't know about you guys, but it's hard to give up books.
Oh, I have that problem.
I die. I was down there. Cece tore the front cover. I'm reading a little novel right now. She tore, and I'm patching it up, and because I'm going to save it even after I'm done reading.
Oh yeah. It's like these are books. I have so many books that I'm never going to touch again the rest of my life, and it's like and there's somebody could be enjoying them out there, but it's like I'm going like no, I'm hoarding the books.
Just looked at my books, and I'm so I've got a lot of those boxes to unpack downstairs and stuff like that. But speaking of books, we're we're now continuing through, working through my new book,
Mm-hmm.
12 Essential Insights. And I appreciate what you said about it earlier, Patrick, that you're really enjoying how it's written and the message that's coming through. And what I love about what we're doing with the book is that you're reading it like Tom and I have looked
Mm-hmm.
at it and stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
you're reading it and you're coming back with, let's focus on this. So I hear you got some gems for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in kind of wrapping up the second chapter, our exploration of it, defining emotional sobriety, I thought we would drill in on this idea of environmental support versus self-support. And, I thought we could begin by dissecting this quote. When our emotional center of gravity is located in an expectation of how things are supposed to be, then our happiness is determined by whether or not things go our way. Life happens, and when it doesn't conform to our expectations, we object. Blaming becomes second nature. This is an impossible way of life. So
That's great.
this is a state of mind.
Could you read that again? Just read it one more time, please.
Yeah, of course, of course. When our emotional center of gravity is located in an expectation of how things are supposed to be, then our happiness is determined by whether or not things go our way. Life happens, and when it doesn't conform to our expectations, we object. Blaming becomes second nature. This is an impossible way of life.
Wow, that is the heart in many ways of what emotional sobriety is, isn't it? It's this idea of somehow finding a way to keep our emotional center of gravity over our own 2 feet.
We all going to show up in Metaphors Anonymous one day because of our addiction to metaphor. But when you talk about keeping your center of gravity over your own 2 feet, before we were working together, before I used to do a thing when I was talking to people about relationships where I would get up in the office and I would lean on a chair where all of my weight was on the chair. And I was, basically, if you pull the chair out from under me, then I'm going to fall. And I said, okay, look, I want to show you, this is a picture of my first marriage. It's like everything depends on this being this way. And then, then we go through the process. And when I try to show people too, is that there's nothing wrong with dependency, because part of a relationship is depending on each other, or what I call responsibility to each other, but not for each other. And the idea is, so I'll plant my feet strongly, in a good place, and then lean, into the chair, so that basically the picture is, if you pull the chair out from under me, I'm going to stumble. I'm leaning in enough to where it's going to be hard. It's going to be, but I'm not going to fall over. I'm not going to face plant anymore. And so when I first heard you say that, I thought, man, that just, first of all, I had a place to put it. And I thought about that, but so often, and I was saying this to you earlier today, I think is the idea that, just remembering certain things that we have to remember like that become these revelations all over again.
Oh, it's so true. And listen, what a great, you're right. Where it came from, actually, when I was in Vietnam, we had 2 Korean Marines assigned to our unit. So I was outside of Da Nang on a little fire base called Hill 55. And we were preparing to go on a big operation by the Laotian border. And it was very likely going to mean that a high possibility, high probability that we would end up having hand-to-hand combat because of the situation we were going to be put into. So the Marine Corps, there's a lot of Korean Marines that were stationed in Vietnam, and many of them were trained in martial arts, right?
Yeah.
Especially Taekwondo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is now an Olympic sport, right? It's part of the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing that. So these 2 Korean Marines were signed to our unit to teach us Taekwondo for this operation that was upcoming. And the operation was about 3 months away. So we had 3 months of training, 90 days with these guys. So every day at the end of all the other duties we had, right around 6 o'clock after chow was done, we'd load up most of our guys in these 2.5-ton trucks, and we drive to the top of Hill 55 where they built a dojo for our training. Concrete floors, just a tin roof over the top.
Mm-hmm.
Those boards, those Macaraya boards where you toughen up your knuckles when you're eating them outside. And we were up there every night from, I'd say, 6 to 8 o'clock at night, 2 hours working. Our gis were made out of bed sheets. They were sewn out of bed sheets. They had belts imported from Korea for us. But the first thing that these guys taught us, and I don't know the Korean word for it, but the English word is horse stance. And it's the basic fighting stance, right? That they teach you before they teach you anything else. And what it's about is how to start to become aware of your center of gravity and keeping it, distributed over both feet, and learning to keep your center of gravity there as a good platform to be able to fight from. And I'll tell you, man, we would be in that horse stance for 10, 15 minutes a night. And the first night, my knees were, I looked like I had Parkinson's disease. I was shaking so bad, because they were strengthening. We're not used to being, kind of sitting into our center of gravity. And that's what came to me when I started to think about this emotional center of gravity is this horse stance. And I said, my God, you're so grounded to the earth in this stance in terms of being able to react well, counter, do all kinds of things from it. And I said, what a metaphor for life is that the more grounded we are, and this is a term you and I recognize from the 70s and 80s, all of the body work that was coming along, and people like Dr. Stanley Kellerman, Dr. Murray Bowen, all these other, Charles Kelly in Los Angeles, all of these other body-oriented therapists would look at our grounding when we were standing, and they'd get you to stand up and talk, and they'd look like, well, how are you holding your body in space, right? And they would see that someone that was off balance was so vulnerable to all the shit going on around them. And I remember going to these workshops, and it would be amazing the effect that it would have on a person when the therapist would just get them more grounded.
Yes.
Bend your knees a little bit. Breathe into the lower part of your abdomen. Sink yourself down, bring your awareness into yourself instead of outside yourself as much as it. Just these few kind of interventions like that made big impacts on how somebody was feeling at the moment. And then when I got exposed to this emotional sobriety stuff, I says, my God, that's what they were trying to teach us back then. They were trying to say, they didn't have the concept of putting it in this context that we've been putting it in, but they were saying is, keep your own balance. Keep your balance. Worry about keeping your balance. Try to live your life in a way. Now, they didn't understand, because nobody ever talked about the expectations and what happens and how we knock ourselves off balance by as soon as I put my expectations on how something is supposed to be. Now my balance is going to be determined by how things are. Is it going to go according to my plans?
But see, the idea is it's still from the inside out. This stuff, what you're describing, and I love the fact that it actually comes from not from tennis, but from a life and death preparation. Basically, that's a little bigger, a little heavier issue there.
Right? You just put it in that context, and wow, right?
Yeah, and it's like, but I think the idea, just understanding that our bodies, if we're always talking about inside out. It's like. The idea that the way I carry myself, and the way, the way that I stand, the way that I walk, the way I do, this kind of stuff it's not just how I appear to other people, which is how a lot of times people who talk about body language and stuff, that's what they're talking about, which is obviously off balance, look like this. So no, we're talking about how it feels on the inside. So whether they had the concepts that we put to this, or Bill Wilson began to put to this in terms of expectations and unenforceable rules. For years, I had some serious lower back and problems down in my legs where, I really had trouble for 4 or 5 years standing up straight. It was really painful. But the very first thing that I remember about that is a woman that, her name is Cheryl Kerrigan. I'll do a plug for her book. She has a book about editing disorder called Telling Ed No. And she's a yoga person. And so we were at a retreat that she was co-leading with me. And it's like, so she said, well, let me show you some yoga stuff. And so I said, okay. And then she taught me what's called the mountain stance. Okay. Now the mountain stance is standing up straight. That's it. It's like, and she showed me all kinds of ways I was doing it wrong, standing, and exactly what you said, when I held my body in the way, that's all it was, getting completely aligned. It hurt like a mother. I really began to realize how much this was just about how I work from the inside out, because it hurts so much. And it's like, to this very day, when I've gone through some other kinds of treatment for that, it's like, but the idea that I can do that I don't take that for granted. And I don't think that's just because I'm an old guy. I think it's just because I wasn't that old when she was showing me this stuff. It's like it really is the beginning. And so for us to take this and say, okay, we need, if somebody's they're listening and stuff like that, it's like, don't just stop at the idea that we're talking about how to take care of our bodies. Use this metaphor and think in terms of, where are you off balance? Where are you leaning? Where are you not supporting yourself, in your life? And it's like, that's where it begins.
Self-supporting, and this is from the book, self-support is accepting reality and others as they are. And then this is the second part that I'd like you guys to speak on, and actively seeking the kind of help we need when appropriate. So part of self-support, right, is also asking for people to pitch in, when you need that extra boost.
Well,
right?
that's such a good point, Patrick, because so many people, when I'm giving workshops on this, and we've even seen it on the Thursday night emotional sobriety meeting. Well, are we just talking about a kind of a radical independence that says we don't need anybody? And
Right.
that's not what we're saying. It's just the way that I think of this is that what's happening here is I'm taking responsibility to get my needs met. And if I'm struggling with someone or something, then I turn to somebody to get some help to figure it out. You see, so it's not that I don't need anyone and that I'm an island unto myself. And it's that I am ultimately responsible for my emotional well being and for getting my needs met in this world. Nobody's here to take care of me. Nobody's here to meet my needs. That's my job, nobody else's job. Now, that's an evolution, because obviously when we're children, we're in a different place, right? We don't have that capability. That's not available to us yet. It's developing, right? It's always developing. That's the arc, right? We start from complete dependence on our mother for everything in that womb, towards becoming more and more capable of supporting ourselves. Or the term I like better than even independence is differentiation.
Right.
I learned to differentiate so that now I'm not depending on my mother for oxygen. When I'm born, what do I have to do? Breathe. I got to give myself the oxygen.
Because independence is a word that is used a lot. This is how differentiation works in independence. Self-support puts us in a place where we can become resourceful about not only accessing, but actually utilizing other support. Because what we're doing when we're not doing that, most of us have stories about this, is like we're manipulating. It's like, whether we think of it as that or not, if I'm not meeting my own needs, and I'm trying to get you to meet my needs by manipulating you, by being being pitiful, or maybe I'll be pissed off, or whatever I'm going to be. But the idea is, when you're sitting there standing in that horse, what is it called? The horse stance?
Yes.
Yeah. Standing in the horse stance, or from my experience, the mountain position. It's like, okay, from here, then first of all, that's going to see what we both started off describing in our experiences with that is, it gave us information. You're sitting there shaking all over the place. So what does that tell you? Well, okay, this is diagnostic. This is important. The fact that where I hurts even more when I'm in the position I'm supposed to be standing in. That's a powerful information. I have to strengthen myself, and then from there, we become responsible for asking for what we need. But in order to ask for what we need, we also have to be able to identify.
Right. And going off what you said, very important. I like this part in the book where, when we demand that others live up to our expectations, we exclude them from the very relationship we're attempting to have with them, which to me is like such a fascinating paradox, and having this expectation that you're supposed to understand me, you're actually you're disconnecting. You're kind of making it more of a transactional.
Well, you're demanding
Relationship.
that they be an extension of you rather than be I love that idea of excluding them from the very relationship because no, now, you know, they can't be them. If they're going to cooperate with you, they have to be an extension of you.
And this is where how it manifests itself. And I recognize saying this to partners, you know, less today, which Jess is grateful for. But I hear clients saying this all the time. It's like, well, you're just not being responsive to my needs, right? It's telling the other person, look, I'm telling you what I need, and you're not being responsive. And it's so interesting, like what you just pointed out with this, Patrick, is that what we don't see at that point is that the very thing I'm accusing my partner of doing is not being considerate of my feelings. When I'm making a demand of them, I'm doing that. That's what I'm doing. It's not what they're doing. That's what I started out with. They're just responding in kind, so to speak. It's like if I'm putting my demand on you without really seeing or making room for you to decide if you're interested in meeting it or not, then I'm not considerate of you. I'm just demanding that you be considerate of me.
Which gives us a wonderful, I love to take things into practical tools, and good questions are wonderful tools. And as long as we don't ask them rhetorically, the question is, how might I be doing what I am feeling that this person is doing to me? And it doesn't even mean that they're not doing it. It just, again, it comes back to the thing that to me, I just think is so pivotal to this whole thing is you always start on this is one of the gifts of 12 step for me. Always start on your side of the street. It's like, it doesn't, and people hesitate to do that. I hesitated to do that because I was afraid somebody else was going to get off the hook, you know? And it's like, the truth is, it's like, whether they need to change something or not, actually there's an order in which this stuff is done. And it's like, if I'm going to strengthen myself, I said, as I remember to sit up straight, by the way, because we're talking about this stuff, is I need to pay attention to my own posture, and both literally and metaphorically.
Right on. Boy, that's right on, Tom. See, that is a practical thing that people could take away from this cast. If you're feeling that you're being misunderstood, pause and really check in to see if you are understanding what the other person is saying before demanding that they understand you. I mean,
it's in the St. Francis prayer, right? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. It's like, that's one of those things we just forget. I do all the time.
Even the one where they go, seek first to comfort rather than to be comforted.
You can comfort, because you can comfort even if you don't understand, because you can understand, is this person.
Sometimes that also means with ourselves, you know, instead of me demanding that I understand you, and see, I've even flipped this further, and I've said, if I'm saying you're not understanding me, who's the most important person to understand what I'm talking about? Me. Yeah. I got to see what it means to me first before I'm demanding you. So seek first to comfort is, instead of being comforted, demanding you comfort me, let me try to figure out how to comfort myself. Maybe I'll approach you and say, hey, are you available? You know, I'm going through a rough time. But if that's not available, that's my job.
Well, so it brings us to another question. You know, if I'm demanding you understand, if we with this, we say to ourselves, how do I understand? What do I understand about what's going on? Because, you know, with hindsight, we know not often we're the ones, you know, we don't. It's like we don't have the whole picture. We have some of it. We know we're hurting, but it's like we're, you know, and part of what we're talking about here today is putting this stuff in the right order.
Right on. And see, that's so important, right? So if I stop and say, check in with myself, am I understanding what's going on for me right now? It takes the hook out of what I'm trying to do with the other person.
Yes.
He'll use that metaphor too, and it's another wonderful one from his letter. I think there's so many great things that he talked about. But when he talked about unhooking people from our claims and our demands, or from what he called these hobbling expectations. I mean, in unhooking it, I had this image of the old dock workers, you know, used to have these hooks on a bale of hay and cotton, and they hook them to lift them up, right? And I was thinking, well, that's what these expectations are. I'm trying to hook somebody to get them to do what I want them to do and move in the direction
Oh
I
my God, I have some of those at the barn. We're moving hay
there
bales.
you
It's
go.
like
Still
it's
have those.
perfect. Talk about getting caught up in metaphor. But it's like I'm going like if I just think about that and it just almost kind of shocks me into that seems like a kind of a violent image for that I'm doing to somebody where I'm actually psychologically hooking into them like that. And it's like when I can be aware of that, see, the more aware we are of ourselves, this is the place where, we have those should monsters that are telling us we're bad people and all this. But the truth is, when you become aware of this stuff, our own value system kicks in. I
Right.
don't want to do that to people.
That's
And I
right.
certainly don't want to do it to the people I do it to, who are the people that I love.
I just had this awareness or this epiphany. Awareness is like breathing for us. It
Mm.
is what we need to do to be able to regulate ourselves. We need to take in oxygen and blow off carbon dioxide to keep the right balance between oxygen and carbon dioxide in our body, right? We need awareness like we're talking about it right now. So if you're listening to this, the first thing you can do to support yourself is to increase your awareness of what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Just very,
Awareness.
very simply, I just wrote down two things. It's just breathe, to connect them. Breathe, be aware.
That's right. That's right. Breathe and be aware. I mean, breathe and be aware. If I'm aware, like you said, if I'm aware that I'm sitting here demanding you understand me and I realize that I'm demanding it and I start to understand that I'm doing that to you, and if I own that, I'm going to probably keep the connection okay with you and say, God, I realized I just put a trip on you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, are you going to say, yeah, asshole? Well, you might say that at first, but
I might.
but it's go, but it's
with love.
but it's going to start the connection, right? It's going to enhance the connection because now I'm owning what I'm doing. And when that happens, it's wonderful ground for a conversation rather than looking at what the other person's not doing that I'm demanding them do.
Well, and the other piece this does is it reminds me of some of the stuff in the book I wrote called Earning Your Own Respect, is that the idea is that's simply about being congruent with your own value system. And with that awareness, that's what you're describing is if you can do that and you come back, it's like that not only is a better way to do it because you're not really causing problems in the relationship, or you're not putting something that's unwarranted on your partner or whoever you're communicating with, but you actually are going to not only feel better but be better, because we talk about all the time, at the end of the day, self-respect is the measure. I feel better about myself because I've done the work in the proper order.
Right on. No, I love the direction that this conversation has gone today about self-support. So self-support, then, too, we can think of in the way we're talking about it now, is when I take responsibility for myself, I'm also taking responsibility for the way that I'm connected to you, the way I make contact with you, the way I talk to you about what's going on. It's what you said before. We're responsible to another person, not for another person. See, this is where, when we're undifferentiated or emotionally immature, whatever you want to call it, we end up, instead of taking, because we want to take responsibility, we know it's important, but then we end up taking responsibility for things that we're not responsible for, like the responsibility for someone else.
Yes.
And
that's very confusing for people. And it's like, it certainly has been for me in my life, but it's like the distinction, talk about differentiation, the distinction between those two things, just to challenge myself to try to even if that's a process. And again, concepts, by themselves are useless. We got to find a way. How do I bring that into my life and practice? Actually, the concept can be more than useless. It can, sometimes people just get high on these concepts. It's like, oh, this is great. This is going to change me. It's like, no, it's not until you figure out how to practice it.
Yeah, that's right. That's plug it in, use it in your life, integrate it. See, that's what Bill's, the wisdom of the 12 steps shows up in that step 12, is what talking about having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We tried to carry this message, to those who were still suffering, right? And to practice these principles in all our affairs. That practice these principles was a call to integration. You got to plug it in. It can't just be an idea. It needs to be something that is available for you that you can use. And that
Mhm.
comes from practicing, trying it on. And so that's the other thing we'd urge you to do, this self support, this keeping your emotional center of gravity over your 2 feet, taking responsibility for yourself. It's so important because it's so empowering. And I want to make this distinction. Our dear friend Dr. John Amodeo, he's
Mhm.
got a great book out there called Love and Betrayal. And one of the things he was talking about is that the self-contempt that comes from blame, and especially self-blame, which is often confused with taking responsibility, is disempowering. And it's not the same as the self empowerment that comes from taking responsibility for yourself. So, if you're taking responsibility, is it's going to empower you, it's going to enhance you, not diminish you. But if we're blaming, and back to that thing that you talked about earlier, Patrick, if I'm blaming you or blaming me, it's going to diminish the possibilities. It's going to decrease the possibilities available to us. If I'm taking responsibility, the possibilities are amplified, right? They're increased. So that's the other way to think about this stuff. Because people say, well, how do you know if you're on the right track or not? Pay attention to the experience you're having in your
Mhm.
life. If your attitudes, if your beliefs and stuff are working, your life is going to be humming, baby. You're going to be enjoying things. You're going to be flowing. You're not going to be in conflict. If you've got these expectations like I have, you're going to find yourself getting angry, getting frustrated, trying to control other people, having arguments, having conflicts, ending relationships because they're not doing what you want them to do, thinking I got to cut these toxic people out of my life.
Mhm.
I mean, all of this other nonsense that we try to do to deal with this stuff instead of growing ourselves up.
Well, and the first two, just a moment ago, just before that little paragraph, you just said you started with 2 words: pay attention. How do I do this? Pay attention. And it's like, and it's actually, it's a scientific method. We come up with hypotheses and we test them. It's like, I tell this to my clients all the time. It's like, why don't, because you're talking about discovering new possibilities, doesn't mean every new possibility we're going to have is going to be productive for us, but it's like, it's worth exploring. Sometimes most of us have this experience of knowing sometimes the best thing we can do is just whatever we do, just do something different than you've always done before.
There you go.
Try something else and then pay attention. Failure becomes success when you learn from it. If you test a hypothesis and it doesn't seem to work, then you change your approach. It's a process. It's a practice.
What is that distinction, though, between taking responsibility for yourself and blaming yourself and others?
For me, it's a very subjective experience. The words, can be very much the same. I can take a sentence like, "Hey, get off your ass and do this." If it comes from that should monster, that condemning voice, it really has. It's really easy to know that. It's like I can feel that voice, that's feeling that is condemning of me. This is why I always talk about tough love is self-love. It's like the idea, but I have a guy in my head that can basically go like, and he has to work with me pretty often because I'm a great procrastinator. No, and I always say, like, my self-loving voice is, he gains rapport with me because he cusses too, and like, get off your ass, Rutledge. Just like, you have to get this done. But what I can feel, and I think we can learn to feel this, is that voice is on my side. That voice is coming out of a place of is rooting for me. It really is a loving voice, because it says it's not okay for you not to get this done because you're important, is what the feeling is.
Constructive.
Yeah, it's just, and for me, the phrase that I just keep using is does this feel like this is coming from a source that is on my side, or actually more sabotaging?
When I'm taking responsibility, I'm not feeling stuck.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, is that when I'm taking responsibility, there seems to be a lot more wiggle room in my life, a lot more space for me to do the exploration, experimentation that Tom is talking about. When I'm stuck and I'm fixed, my freedom seems so limited. it's so dependent on you. You know, the other way, it's more dependent on what I'm doing and how I'm dealing with the situation, which, you know, now there's many other possibilities, because when it's dependent on you, then I got to figure out a way to get you to do what I want you to do, right, in order for me to be okay. And I've gotten pretty skilled at manipulation. I think most of us are pretty skilled at it. And that's not a terrible thing, because we're just trying to figure out a way to get our needs met. See what Tom said a minute ago, even in some of our worst behavior, there's a positive intention. I'm trying to figure out how to get my needs met. Now, I'm not doing it in a very good way. That's okay. I mean, we can learn from our mistakes, but we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. And that's why if we listen to these things and we learn from our mistakes, we grow ourselves. So it's not about doing any of this stuff perfectly. It's about learning from what we're doing, paying attention, and finding a way, if I can use my experience, to continue to take that next step in my development and my differentiation and my growth.
Yeah. And Alan, that goes to something I was saying to you, I think it was before we started recording today, but any one of these things that we learn, have a reasonable expectation. You're going to forget it. Now, if you don't, that's great. That's wonderful. But I always say it's like breath counting meditation. If we're going to do a breath counting meditation and we're going to sit here and say the assignment is we're going to breathe and we're going to count our breaths to 10. Okay, now if the three of us are going to do that, and one of us does that for a while and says, I got to 10 3 times, I'm going to say, bullshit, you didn't get to 10 once, because our little minds wander off after about 1 or 2, and then it takes a while for us to know we've wandered off and come back. So just like that, we get these ideas. And the truth is, the more, it's like anything else with practice, the more you do it, the more repetition there is, the more natural it becomes for you, and you will do it more and more and more. But even then, my experience is anyway, I will forget at times, and what I need to rather than, and that's where the bully would come in and beat the crap out of me in the past. Whereas right now, when I remember something that I have forgotten that is now obvious to me, it's like that's a positive experience. That's me going, good for me.
Yeah, practice to me, based on what you guys are talking about, seems like the only way I can hone my sense of awareness, because I was just thinking about the last week and I felt like shit for most of it. And I couldn't quite put my finger on what the mechanism was that was causing me to feel a certain way. And I was going to ask you, Alan, with the move you just had and like all the stresses and that situation with your dog and stuff, like it sounds like, I'll just point to the dog situation specifically. You were able to maintain your awareness to a certain extent, right? And kind of like keep that wide stance.
Yeah, right. Is that, we learned from that. First of all, look, we're never gonna, we're gonna call previous owners. There's a lot of things we could have done that would have protected Rocky a lot better than we did. So we'll take some responsibility for the outcome of this. But the other thing is we weren't going to change what they had done. It was getting Rocky the help that he needed to get, and to be as responsive as we could be to his needs at that point in time. So that was the other part of it, as well as, Jess wanted to beat herself up and trying to support her, and to not take it on like that. And the kids were traumatized by it, and to sit with them and say, we're going to take care of Rocky, and, we're going to get him the help. And look, and thank God we found these 2 vets. They work at they own this veterinary hospital, and they're so loving. And it's the first time Rocky has gone to a vet where he's not shaking before he walks in.
Wow. That's a big deal. I know that one.
He has a sense that these people love him and cared for him and saved his life. I swear. I don't know if it manifests itself.
He knows. Yeah.
Dog consciousness, but he walks in there like, hey, family, I'm here. Hey, he walks around the place like he owns the place. I mean,
that's nice.
And they welcome him and treat him as like, Rocky, it's so good. You're doing so well. It's amazing to me to see that effect. So all of that, right, is searching for what can we do with it. That becomes, for me, such a big part of this emotional sobriety.
This is tell me if I got this right, Alan. It's like what Patrick is asking about there is like, that's a really good example of what, because I remember when you first used this phrase quite a while ago, I wasn't sure exactly what that was, but I think I do understand more of it now. And that's an example of you holding on to yourself.
That's an example of holding on to myself, is staying focused on what I can do, what I need to do, stay in the course of what I need to do. The other thing is following up and making sure we're going back to the doctor, regardless of if it's convenient or not. There's a commitment to seeing this through. And you should see, some of these wounds were horrible. I mean,
I remember you describing this. Yeah.
on his poor elbows, where he was laying in the urine. And a dog's urine is highly acidic, man. I mean, it's a high concentration of acid. I mean, just look at our grass out in front. Every place as he pees, it's brown. I mean, that was on his skin, right? For days. Yep. I mean, in a few places on his left elbow, the skin broke to his bone. You could see the white bone. And now you can see the pink skin growing back and covering it up. And so he is healing. I mean, he is healing, and we're really glad for it. And thanks for asking about him. He's a dear dog, man. He's very sweet, and that's what they said about him. This is one of the sweetest dogs that we've ever met. I mean, how could somebody do that to them?
I got to tell you just a quick little story. It reminds me, I was at I have a friend here in town. You may know him, Alan. His name's Vince Parrish. You may have met him when you were around, but it's like he does ethics workshops. He said that one of the things that distinguishes us as human is our ability to forgive. And there's this guy in the group, is another therapist in town named Bob Reddick. It's like may he rest in peace. He's been gone for a little while, but he said he just raised his hand. And he said, well, let me ask you a question. He said, if I lock my wife and my dog in my trunk and in my car and leave them for an hour, and I open the trunk, which one of them forgives me first? I just looked at Vince and said, can we go now? I think the workshop's over. He just deconstructed them, because those beautiful animals, they are so loving. They are so forgiving. It's like...
So true. So true. Yeah.
They're special.
So the right answer to that was the dog forgives first.
Oh, forgives immediately. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for rescuing me.
And listen, and what a lot of us would do is we'd expect our wife to do it first. See, it's
right.
Expectation. So if I expect that, then once again, I'm not thinking about the experience my wife just went through.
Well, as far as just being intelligent people, I could say on behalf of both you and I, neither one of us would expect our wives to forgive us first.
If we locked them in there. Oh, that's good. Let's hope we don't have to test that out.
I'm not going to do that one.
I think there might be a chance you and I get locked in the trunk well before we lock them in the trunk.
And longer than an hour, yeah.
Longer than an hour. Patrick may have to come and let us out of the trunk somewhere. Patrick, if we don't show up on a Sunday, check our trunks. That's the moral of this story.
We need like a little like a Batman device I can put on my keychain. You can just ping me and I'll know to come calling.
Yeah. The one thing I think I'd like to extend this conversation to for next week, and because I think it's worthy of another discussion, is taking this responsibility to another person, because I really want to talk about it in terms of this whole idea that runs around is you hurt me. Mm-hmm. Is in a relationship when someone says that to someone, and what does that mean in terms of what happens, and how can we start to listen to a deeper meaning of these things? Because that's what I'm wanting people to get out of our talk as well, Patrick, is I want people, when they hear people say things like, you make me feel this way, that what they're just saying is, I'm struggling with what's going on and I'm trying to figure out who to blame for it. And that's all I know how to do. So why I'm saying that is because if somebody is doing that and blaming you, you don't have to take that personally. You can just understand they're doing that because that's all that's available to them at this particular point in time. And if they knew better, they could do better, but they don't know better at that point in time. It really feels like to them you're hurting me, or you've done this to me that you shouldn't have done. And so I want us to start listening to people and to ourselves even in this different way. Is when we're saying these things, we need to listen to what the message means, not just to what the content of the message.
Right. And what that calls for is keeping our defenses down. I'm talking about just a couple more minutes, and you can have some exchanges where you can actually have some clarification. The other piece I want to be sure we get to that I think we need to stay on this topic about too is let's not assume that people know when we just need additional support from others, what that looks like and how we do that, because that has a whole nother realm of expectations that we have with that. And it's like, how, because if I'm looking for support from, you guys, I'm not going to get necessarily, it's good that I recognize I need support. I ask for that. It doesn't mean I have to get exactly what is going to make me all better. And I need to be able to sort through that and basically take what's helpful, leave what's not. And a lot of times people, they're at a loss when they've been so pathologically, counter dependent, and let's talk about what our experiences are with reaching out for help and sometimes being disappointed and sometimes getting what we need.
Right on. Sounds like a good show next week. I'm going to definitely tune in.
I'll if I'm not in a trunk, I'll be there, buddy.
This emotional sobriety podcast sounds pretty interesting. We should listen.
All right, you guys, see you next week.
Until next time.
All right, bye.
Tend your life, tend your myth. Cultivate your narrative with whomever you're with. Then with glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me. It ain't a crime to be a human. Never be ashamed to be yourself. Rest assured that whatever you're doing will entertain me like nobody else. So here's to us, my old friends, until it's time to drink the wine and break the bread again. With glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me.